Welcome back to Mental Health, where we talk about pop culture, social issues, and politics, and filter them through a mental health lens. I know it's been a little while since I've done an episode. I've been quite busy with kind of my normal day job, and also with kind of the bigger, more popular channel. So to the few of you who actually listen to this kind of side channel, sorry it's been a little while. It'll probably continue to be a bit slower. And also, you may notice that the episodes on the kind of podcast side of things, like the Castbox version, iTunes, all that, are kind of dropping off. And the reason for that is that I already pay for the upkeep of my other channel, and I can't really just qualify paying to keep them up on the second channel. So if you want to go back and listen to old episodes, you can still find them on the YouTube channel, and they will remain there for free, whereas I have to pay a monthly fee to do it with the other one. So with that out of the way, I really wanted to talk about what's going on in Portland right now. And obviously, the whole Andy Gno situation is kind of like the powder keg right now that's sort of, getting people really talking about these issues. But I really want to make this a lot less about Andy and more so the situation at large and what can be done about it. And again, as somebody who lives in Portland and sees this city as a place with great potential and so much natural beauty and it's an exciting place to live. And it's really sad to see it just being literally torn apart by a combination of just partisan politics and policy choices that seem like they maybe, they sound good on the surface, but they're not really helping anything. So that's really what I want to get into is what does this current state of things mean and what's actually happening? Because possibly many of you, if you're getting your news from similar sources as me, as I tend to listen to a lot of podcasts, a lot of YouTubers, I actually listened to the hour-long interview that Andy did with Brett Weinstein, and it was kind of interesting to hear that. But the sort of, I guess I call it a myth now out there, is that this is largely the fault of Maher Wheeler, and I fell into that group. I was of the opinion that was very much aligned with kind of what a lot of the big personalities are talking right now, is that Ted Wheeler is a very left-leaning individual, and that aspect of it is true. A lot of what I'm going to tell you is based on kind of, I get some insider information from people actually within the police department, people that are higher up. And so it was nice to sit down with them and have a conversation. But that much they did not push back on. Maher Wheeler is a very liberal person. But where it goes wrong, and where I had it wrong as well, is that the myth as it goes is that because he's very left-leaning, he kind of sympathizes with these Antifa people, and as a result is kind of treating them with kid gloves, so to speak. And that is not true, is now my current understanding, but something that I had been believing for a little while now. But the better explanation that actually makes a lot of sense the more I thought about it and the more that I talked to this person who actually has been sort of deep in the situation, has more understanding of what's actually going on and the more systemic pieces here, is that Maher Wheeler, who's also the police commissioner, wants the same thing the rest of us want. He recognizes that this cannot persist. He does not want to see violence in his streets. And at the end of the day, it's not good for him either, as we're seeing. He's very much being blamed for the situation, and it doesn't particularly bode well for him. And on some level, it also makes sense that even if what people thought about Wheeler was true, it really doesn't make sense for him to try to, more or less buy the vote of these Antifa people, because they don't like him either. There's been a town hall recently where they think that he's a tool of the right. So it's kind of in this double bind situation where nobody really likes him. It's not winning him any favor politically. So what's really happening is that there have been a series of what I would call frivolous lawsuits that have been set forth largely with the support of the ACLU. So I'm even looking at an article right now from March of 2018 where they were actually hit with 6 lawsuits with allegations of excessive force during protests. So the ACLU, or the American Civil Liberties Union of Oregon, sued the city and brought up these lawsuits and basically said that these are civil rights violations, that the police force is like becoming militarized, which is really ridiculous. And they've ended up losing a lot of these lawsuits, which is a lot of lost revenue, a lot of damage financially, and also just to their credibility. Like these messages are being kind of amplified, and they're being treated as if this is like the police are, it's becoming a police state, which couldn't be further from the truth as we see. So, but so that's kind of the crux of it, is Wheeler and the police aren't having their hands tied because Wheeler is telling people to stand down because he sympathizes with Antifa. It's really more so that they can't afford to have any more of these lawsuits. And it's creating some serious damage, and they're having to kind of rebuild their reputation and uphold the law at the same time. And so that's a big part of it, is that they're actually having their hands tied by things like the ACLU. And people that I've kind of talked about in previous episodes that I kind of consider to have good intentions, like their intentions is to look out for the people of Portland and make sure that they're not being abused by their government and by their police force. And again, on the surface, that sounds great, but the reality is it's doing more harm than good, because now it is creating a situation where I feel like the police can't effectively do their job when they actually need to, and where people are being hurt, and that can't stand either. And it's been exacerbated too by fake news stories. There was one floating around that I was reminded of, where a protester posted a picture of like their helmet they were wearing, and supposedly it had the police were using these like diversion devices that basically create a lot of loud noise to help disperse the crowd. It's a non-forceful intervention. It's not like beanbags or anything like that. Nobody's being hit with anything. It's mostly just noise that is causing the crowd to disperse. But somebody posted a picture of one of the shells from these devices supposedly having embedded itself in his helmet after, I don't know, falling from the sky or whatever. I don't know exactly what the allegation was. But my understanding of it is that people who looked at the photo could tell that, who knew what they were looking at, could tell that this person had actually like drilled into their helmet and then pushed the device into it to make it look like that's what had happened, and then posted this story, and it went viral, and that just added to the fuel. And then, surprise, surprise, all of a sudden, Portland police were not able to use those devices anymore. And it seems like piece by piece, that's been something that's been going on, is that a story will go viral, people like the ACLU will get behind it, and then the police are not allowed to use yet one more thing that they have at their disposal to try to keep the peace in these situations, because they're again being seen as the aggressor. And again, it's absolutely ridiculous. So these people, just like I've talked about in like mental health policy making and institutions, talked about it in my homelessness episode, it's all just very surface level. It's people who want things to be better, but they really aren't going beyond just scratching like the absolute most superficial part of the details to actually get to a solution. And so as a result, it's more about like taking things away than, okay, what are we replacing them with? How are we going to make sure that we can still keep the peace, even though maybe we've decided that this particular tactic or intervention isn't going to work anymore? And that's a problem, because we're just creating a situation that is more and more lawless, and people are only reporting on the negative aspects of it. So what I would like to see, for those of you who are listening who may have some pull or may know other people or at least can spread the word. I think what I'd really like to see is this whole Andy Gno situation could be seen as an opportunity because we've got the national spotlight and we've got people like Ted Cruz that have, a big platform and the ability to make some actual changes, and who seems like a guy who actually listens based on things I've been seeing him do, particularly in the past year. And then we've also got big platforms from, podcasters and YouTubers are talking about this. And I'd like to see the narrative shift to what I understand now. Because again, this is me getting information from higher ups that are actually in the situation. Because I'm by no means a professional in the situation. But if we could get those people all reporting on what I'm talking about, how the problem isn't really Wheeler, it's the ACLU, it's these lawsuits, it's these liability concerns, then how maybe we could get those platforms to push and put some pressure on the ACLU and start making some changes there and saying, hey, this needs to stop. Like, it's good that you're trying to protect your citizens, but to put it simply, you're going too far and you're causing more damage than good in the long run. And hey, we want to work with you. We want to stand up for what's right. And maybe there are tactics that are outdated and that could be harmful and that it is time to change. But the solution shouldn't be, okay, we sue you, we charge you all these damages, and you're no longer allowed to effectively do your job. And now more people are getting hurt. And it's like, now I totally get where they're at, because it's like they want to enforce the law, and and the other crazy thing too is I was told that the referendum to make it illegal for these protesters to wear masks was largely pushed by Wheeler. He wanted this. And even if it wasn't, I mean, my understanding is that it was basically his idea, but even if that's not true, like he's a strong supporter of it and he wanted it. And it was other people, other commissioners and probably other people in organizations, again, like the ACLU, that slapped it down and said, no, that's like a freedom of speech violation. They have every right to do that. And that's not true federally. Like, there are certain states that keep that separate and that is illegal. And then there are states like ours where it is perfectly legal. And I see that alone, like that could be a big win. I think a lot of these people, if they didn't have the anonymity to hide behind, they would be less likely to even come out, period. And even if they do come out, it would be a lot easier to prosecute the ones that are actually breaking the law. Because let me be clear, like, I'm not saying that Antifa shouldn't exist at all. I'm not saying that they don't have the right to protest. I'm not saying we should just shut them down. Like, I'm a big free speech advocate too. However, there needs to be some accountability. I may not particularly like them, but for those of them that are out there just holding up signs and making posts about problems that they're seeing and, things that are nonviolent, that's fine. Go ahead and do it. I may not agree with everything they say, but I'll defend to the death their right to say it, as they say. However, when it escalates to they're actually breaking the law, they're assaulting people, they're harassing people, they're throwing projectiles at people, I don't care who you're throwing it at. There's been so many instances where it's not defensible, it's not a self-defense act, it's not a situation where it needed to happen. And so that, and also, breaking storefronts, bullying people, there's so many problems with it. So I think if we could at least push that through and say, okay, no more masks, I think that would have a huge impact. That's not going to solve the entire problem, but I think it would reduce a lot of the incidents of the more violent side of what's going on. Because again, looking at it from a mental health professional perspective, like, there's a big, it's kind of like the difference between talking to someone in person and talking to somebody on social media. When you're hidden behind your computer and they can't see you and they don't actually know who you are and you've dehumanized them because you don't really know who they are as a person, you're much more likely to say and do foul things towards them. Whereas if you're face to face, you're going to censor yourself on some level. You're going to kind of be maybe more careful about what you say. Not everyone, but most people on average. Like that is statistically proven to be true. And I feel like it to a similar degree, it's like that with these masks. Like it's really bad in two ways. Like one, they have the mask on so they can hide behind it and they feel safer to kind of do whatever they do, and they fall into this mob mentality. They're all basically kind of wearing a uniform together, and people make poorer decisions in groups a lot of the time, actually, because there's sort of a diffusion of responsibility, and then you factor in just that whole just mentality of being a part of a unit as opposed to an individual person with personal accountability. So there's that, and then there's also the downside for them, really, is that it's even easier for us to dehumanize them, and I catch myself doing it too. When you can't put a face to it and they're just a faceless mob of I call them Foot Clan LARPers. Again, it's easier for us to just look at them as kind of personality-less, disposable group of individuals, when really these people are, they're people too. They have families, they have jobs, they have lives, and their lives matter too. And I want to factor that into all this, even though I abhor their actions and really absolutely want personally nothing to do with them. But again, I'm trying to keep this balanced in sort of the human side of things. So I think the outcome is really win-win with the masks, because a lot of the people who are going out and doing these things are going to feel a lot less safe doing so, because again, their face is going to be out there. People are going to know who they are, and they're much more likely to probably temper their actions because they know that they're being watched, because people know who they are and there are cameras everywhere. And then also, for the ones who do continue to come out and break the law, they can be held accountable because we know who they are, and they're fully responsible because they went out and did it of their own volition and were on camera doing so and are able to be identified. So that's just one aspect of it. But the larger issue is still, like, how do we deal with the larger unrest of this whole situation? Because that doesn't really fix that. It just reduces the amount of people that are on the streets engaging in action. I need to throw in there too, like, this is good for both sides too, because I haven't even mentioned Patriot Prayer or the Proud Boys at this point, but they wouldn't be able to wear masks either, and that might deter them from taking certain actions as well. And so I don't want to act like this is a one-sided thing, because I recognize their role in this as well. But I think, again, like with the mask thing, there'd be fewer counter-protesters. If Patriot Prayer wants to go march through, the reality is they're not, correct me if I'm wrong, but I have yet to see a story or videotape where Patriot Prayer is marching through and just like harassing and singling people out, just random citizens on the street. I could be wrong about that, and if I am, then I need to know about it. But largely, they're just goofballs walking through doing nothing, just putting their message out there. And ultimately, I think that if there were fewer counter protesters, honestly, these people would march through and it would be really boring. Like, nothing would happen, and they might even get bored too, and their numbers would probably start to dwindle even more. Whereas I feel like there's a escalation piece here now where if nobody had like counter protested them, I'm wondering if they would even really exist to the extent that they do right now. Whereas now that they have like an enemy to fight, there's a whole sort of mentality to that where, okay, now we don't want to back down because we're not going to let Antifa take over, and they fight back. And then Antifa says, well, we're not going to back down because we can't let them take over. And then they step up their tactics and their weaponry and all that stuff. I mean, we're seeing it with the milkshake thing too. And let me just throw in too with the milkshake thing. I am so frustrated with people saying like, oh, it's just a milkshake. Like, it's not a big deal. They just get covered in milk and embarrassed. Like, what's the surprise, surprise. People are utilizing that as a strategy because, one, it's harder to prosecute them on that and also that's the other thing that's weird about just the way that Oregon has written some of their laws going all the way back is that's only considered harassment. It's not actually considered assault. It's still illegal, it's still breaking the law in terms of harassment, but it is not labeled as assault, which kind of shocked me, because I'm like, if I'm having something thrown at me, I consider that assault, but that's not how the law sees it. But anyways, these people are, again, this person I talked to said that they did have information that people were mixing like quick dry cement and stuff into it. He didn't have just like the stories have said, that they didn't necessarily have evidence towards that. Even so, they've seen other circumstances where people have been pouring various other chemicals into them. They've been doing this for a while, apparently, with milkshakes and otherwise, and it just wasn't like the big story that it is now, and putting things that are biohazards into the milkshakes. And so people can get hurt, and especially with how things have been escalating, it's only a matter of time before, I mean, look, we had this whole like acid attack thing going on not that long ago, and it's only a matter of time where one particularly really disgruntled person pours something truly corrosive into it and causes some serious harm to somebody. And that's just not okay. I don't care who that somebody is that's getting hurt and what side they stand on. It is not okay to acid attack somebody, whether it be in a milkshake or not. So, yeah, this is, I'm just kind of free flowing at this point. I know this is probably a little bit of a different episode, but I feel the need to just get good information out there and kind of quell misinformation and try to mix as much of my expertise into it as I can. But anyways, so there's all that, and then there's again issues at the policy level, issues that, and those get tied into the liability side of things, and then you've got the civil unrest and the pressure from the community and a lot of the pushback there. This is a very multifaceted thing, but again, I think if we could get some support to actually push through laws around masks, and then also put some pressure on the ACLU overall somehow. I don't even know what that would look like, if that's even possible. I don't know who holds them accountable, but however we can start getting the message out there that that's the real problem and that's the support we need, I think we could, again, kind of grasp this very negative news story and harness it into something good where we can actually help the city, because ultimately that's my goal. My goal here is not to just like rag on Antifa and talk about how much I can't stand them. It's ultimately to get the same thing that they want, which is for people to be safe, to feel safe, people of all colors, nationalities, socioeconomic levels, whatever. That was the other thing that I found so ironic about the whole Andy Gno incident. And to be clear, I've heard some information that Andy's been somebody who's kind of been seeking this out for some time. That's not at all to alleviate the responsibility of the people who attacked him. Whether he was instigating or not, it ultimately is still not okay. Because to me, it reminds me of like the, well, they had it coming argument, which is not okay. But I do want to throw that in there, that I've heard some information that he has been actively seeking this out to sort of become part of the story, so to speak. But in any case, what I found so ironic about this attack is these people are claiming to be defenders of like the downtrodden and protecting the LGBTQ community and people of color. And now here they are, if you watch the videotape, just a group of largely what appear to be white people, young privileged white people, attacking a person of color, because Andy is Asian. He is the son of immigrants, and he is also self-identifying as homosexual. So here you have this very intersectional person who largely these people say that's the people that they're defending, and they're literally attacking them, spraying him with things, throwing things at him, and physically assaulting him, punching him, kicking him, and causing some damage. I don't know. I don't have proof to the extent of what his actual injuries are, but in any case, it's just not okay. It's not okay to do that, and it just strikes me as so goofy, and it brings me back to kind of the psychology of this is I feel like these people have sort of deluded themselves into believing that they're like these saviors of the community and they're actually protecting. I don't think they're going out there and actually just thinking about like, oh, I want to hurt people, I want to get into a fight. I think that they've convinced themselves that It's like soldiers. I mean, it's like experiments that we've seen in the past too, like that famous experiment, I'm forgetting the name off the top of my head, where they had people role play like the prisoners versus the guards, and after a while they started to like take on these personas and act them out. And that is something that we do, especially again in this sort of groupthink mentality. And so I think these people have fashioned themselves to be like soldiers of a great cause, and we all know what that leads to. I mean, I could think of some other examples of that in history, because nobody goes into war thinking they're the bad guy. You always think you're the good guy. Whatever side you're on, you think you're the good guy. And I think these people very much fashion themselves as the good guys, as do the Proud Boys, as do the Patriot Prayer people. But I think deeper down what's really going on, and I've heard other people talk about this too, and I absolutely agree with it, is that it's really just mostly a lot of young people, a lot of people feeling a lack of direction, a lot of frustration with the way things are going, and especially really more so with the way their own lives are going, and a lot of blame, a lot of external locus of control, and feeling like, well, if these other things would just fall into place, then my life would be better. And it's their responsibility to make that better for me. And so that resentment and frustration is leading them to just feel a need to kind of fill that void and feel like they're doing something about it, feel like they're having some sort of control in their life and in what's happening with their community. And they're filling that void with this action, and then eventually evolves into groupthink, kind of like a cult almost. And then the bad decision making takes over. And also, I think there's these bursts of feel-good chemicals in their brain when they're actually taking action physically against people. Like there is a brain-level chemical reaction that's happening in those situations. It's the same thing that we get when, we're playing a slot machine and it cashes out and we're winning. Like it feels good to do that. And I think for the short term, in that instant, there is that like these people who mostly probably feel numb and miserable and depressed get a spark of pleasure when they're hurting these people that they perceive to be as the enemy. And that's that cognitive dissonance piece of it, kind of, is that they've convinced themselves that these people are bad, they're evil, they're the enemy, and therefore it's okay to hurt them, and it feels good to hurt them. And so they keep coming back to more. So no, I'm jumping all over the place right now, but I'm just kind of talking about these things as they come. The other piece of this that goes back again to my homelessness episode is we need to start pushing policy that is actually dealing with root issues, is actually fixing the problem. And one of the bigger ones, too, that this person I was talking about with hadn't, and very much aligned with kind of some of the things I had said, is that I guess we already have, a large facility that could really help with a lot of the people who are struggling and are needing help here. And that includes going back to the homeless population who have a lot of addiction issues, and then some of these protester people too, who are engaging in the more disturbing acts, clearly have their own mental health issues too. And I just want to broaden that again and say that by mental health issues, I don't mean the traditional, they have schizophrenia or they have bipolar or split personality disorders or more extreme things like that. I'm simply saying, if you're willing to hurt somebody in the streets over a disagreement, you have some sort of issue. It may be depression, it may be anxiety, it's probably some trauma rooted in there, and they need help with that too. And so how can we refashion the jail system basically into more of a mental health situation and more like a tiered system, because some people, the solution is to lock them up because that's the only thing that can be done. But for a lot of people, the solution is they're going to need to involuntarily be put into some kind of treatment so that they can get better, because they're not going to seek it out themselves. Oftentimes they're not going to see themselves as the problem because, again, they've externalized everything. So why should I change? Everybody else needs to change. And if they're breaking the law, it would be great if we just had better connections between the criminal justice system, the mental health system, addiction counselors, all this kind of stuff, so that we can work hand in hand in a really unprecedented way to actually deal with those much deeper running roots that need to be addressed if we want a more long-term viable solution to emerge in the long run. And I feel like the ACLU should be on board with that, but the problem that we're gonna run into is that a lot of people are going to see that as a civil rights violation, and that, we're going to empower the police to lock more people up, and we're going to put them where? We're going to involuntarily put them into facilities and whatever. Like, that's not necessarily a popular ask, and there are going to be those people out there who are going to see it as kind of some form of like imperialism or something, or silencing people. But the reality is, again, a lot of these people, when it comes to the root drivers, which I still contend is largely mental health, trauma-related stuff, it's very more individualized down to, just how these people feel disenfranchised, and how do we help them. And then also there's the more systemic piece of how do we make things less partisan, how do we make things less about parties and less divided and more so about ideas and policy, how do we message stuff better. And I've heard that that's something that the police department here is acknowledging that they do need to do better, is get out in front of these things, be more proactive about explaining what's going on. Because I wasn't surprised in that, like, when he explained to me what was actually going on, it made sense. But at the same time, I was like, nobody's talking about that. Like, I've yet to hear that. So that's the stuff that needs to get out there. So how do we, get them on the news, on traditional media, on alternative media, podcasts, YouTuber stations, whatever. Just get the message out there that's more accurate of what's really going on, so that we can just start working to overall longer term solutions. But I think that kind of is enough for now. I think that's sort of the extent of what I truly can speak on the situation, because again, I don't know a ton about like how things work with the ACLU. I am not directly on the police force. I'm just regurgitating to the best of my abilities and best of my understanding what I've been told from people who do know what's going on there, and just throwing my own 2 cents in terms of things that I've seen from a mental health perspective that I think could be viable solutions. But yeah, if this was interesting or helpful to you in any ways, please do share it, or at least share the message of it. Like, start telling people what's going on for real in Portland, and that will give us a little bit more traction to actually solve the correct problem. Because again, while I like that there are people out there who are banding together and like forming coalitions to say, okay, this needs to stop, we need to fix it, I want to make sure those coalitions are fixing the correct problem. Because a lot of them, again, like myself, until I was enlightened recently, are focusing in on something that's not necessarily accurately the true issue at hand here. And that happens so much. That's such a trend of, I feel like everything I talk about on here is just people, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I think that's the quote to end with here. But I'll close with my classic traditional outro. It feels even more fitting right now with this being a big year for Keanu Reeves and also an actual new Bill and Ted movie on the horizon. But I'll close as in saying from our wise saints, Bill S. Preston Esquire and Ted Theodore Logan, be excellent to each other and party on, dudes.